Hi everyone, my name is Ayal. I'll be doing this workshop, which is about rebuttal, advanced rebuttal, I think it's called. I'm not 100% sure what the difference is between basic rebuttal and advanced rebuttal, but we'll go through it as we'll figure it out as we go along. Basically, what I'm going to do is, first of all, I'm going to run over slightly more conceptual framework of what rebuttal is, what it's supposed to be doing within debates. Then we're going to be talking about different ways to structure rebuttal, both in terms of basically 5 or 6 different ways or different types of rebuttal that can be used within debates. And afterwards, we're going to practice. We're going to take some arguments, we're going to attack those arguments, rebuild them, do the whole fun thing with that. So, basically, there are 2 basic elements to debating, right? There is proving our arguments, and there is proving that the other side's arguments are wrong. That's the 2 pillars on which most debating stands. Sorry, no problem. And then, so last workshop you had with Milos about how to build arguments. Now we're going to talk about the second part, which is how to knock them down. That's more fun. So basically, let's start with what not to do when you're doing rebuttal. First of all, and the most tempting thing, is responding to weaker arguments than what was actually made by the other side, what we call a straw man or a misrepresentation of the other side's case. That is, taking words that have been uttered or taking something you could extrapolate from that case, but is not actually the argument made, and respond to that instead of the actual argument. So, for example, let's say we have a motion about affirmative action, and the government says, look, there are scenarios where we recognize that people have certain disadvantages, and we give them certain things in order to compensate for these disadvantages. So, for example, we have handicapped people, and we allow them, or people who are disabled, and we give them things like wheelchairs and ease of access and usable bathrooms. In the same way, we believe that people from a certain minority who have been discriminated against, did not receive the same opportunities, the same education, things like that, also deserve certain access from the state to be provided to them in order to be able to advance. Opposition response, they have told us that minorities are like handicapped people. We don't think that's true. Obviously, that is not a response to the actual argument that was made by the other side, right? So I would say 2 things about why not to do that. One is just annoying. Like, you would be annoyed if someone made a misrepresentation, mischaracterization of your argument and respond to it in this way. 2, it's a complete waste of your time. Because no sensible judge will say, okay, they have responded to this argument that was never made by anyone, therefore they must win something. So, generally, and here's the flip side of that, always try to respond in rebuttal to the strongest variation of the case you've just heard. I think that that's a much better way of dealing with this thing called rebuttal, of trying to think what is the best possible formulation of this argument that could be gathered from what was actually said, and deal with that. Why? First of all, because you are showing that even if, like, you're making sure that your engagement is actually really tight. Like, that even if they make the best version of the case, your rebuttal still stands. Also, specifically, if that team has another speaker speaking after you that can rebuild the argument or make it better, you make sure that rebuttal is still relevant. So, for example, if you are, I think that maybe the most annoying position to be in giving rebuttal is gov whip, where you have where you're reading the op extension, but there is a op whip. You can basically make the whole extension again, and you sometimes don't have a chance to deal with it, and at the same time you also have to deal with 2 other teams. So making sure your rebuttal is comprehensive and really takes the other side as the strongest is really useful in making sure the op whip doesn't have a really easy life, just rebuilding and reframing and getting away with that. Those bastards. So that's one thing. The other thing is, Sometimes judges will give arguments more credit than you would give those arguments. So you want to, again, make sure that you are dealing with the strongest version possible of the argument. This is especially true, and I say this just because I know some teams here are prepping for international tournaments, for Euros, things like that. This is unfortunately even more true when you're dealing with a team that has more ethos than you, a team that's more well-known in the circuit, maybe the judge knows them and stuff like that. So sometimes judges will go the extra mile in filling in some gaps in other teams' analysis. We want to make sure we are fully addressing them at their strongest, so even if they get that extra credit, we are still beating them. And finally, it just makes our speaks higher. Like, if our rebuttal is at a high level, it's sometimes higher level than the argument actually made against us, that is something that will be in our favor, in our credit. So I think it's always useful to try and think. And the reason I'm saying this is very unintuitive, right? Because our basic intuition in an argument is trying to think that the other side is weaker. Like, I don't buy any of that. That's bullshit. None of that is relevant. None of that is true. And I think, and that's very tempting, and that's very natural. And I also think you do need to be certain of your case. But I think that trying to tackle the other side and thinking where the other side is strong and trying to tackle them there is the right approach eventually to debating and to the way we play this game. But that's more on the conceptual level. So, what does it mean to effectively rebut a case?
What does it mean to what?
To effectively rebut, do effective rebuttal, to knock down another team's case. So, I'm asking this as a rhetorical question more than asking for specific replies. Basically, I would say there are many different ways in which you can approach answering an argument. Basically, I'm going to divide them into 6. This is something I give credit for to Yoni Cohen-Idov. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, and a long-time Israeli debate coach. And he came up with Yoni's 6 answers to any argument ever made. And those arguments are, and those responses are the following. 1. And these are ordered by these are ordered by what we want to use first. Like, these are ordered by prioritization, in the sense of the first one is the one that's the most useful sort of rebuttal, and going down from there. So what would be the most effective form of rebuttal you can think of to an argument? You've been debating for a while, you have done different sorts of rebuttals. If you have any suggestions.
Dispute the relevance.
Excellent. Off-clash. This thing is irrelevant to the debate. Why is this such an effective answer?
Because even if it's true, it doesn't stand.
Exactly. Because I don't have, it's the most time efficient. In debates, I have 7 minutes of giving my speech. That is my limiting factor. I could, if you gave me an hour to give a speech, I would be able to rebut any argument ever made by anyone, especially if they have only 7 minutes. The limiting factor for me is time. So if I have something that doesn't take up a lot of my time and is still a useful response, that is the best thing I want to do. And if I manage to prove that an argument is off-clash, that argument can be brilliant. That argument can be well made. That argument can last for like 4 whole minutes in which great analysis was given, and I still win despite it. So, obviously, if an argument is very clearly off-clash, then that response is very easy. Like you're saying, that's completely irrelevant. We don't know why that's important, and so on. The more complex version of that I think is more useful to be familiar with, is when it needs some explanation. So for example, let's say we have a motion on limiting the work week to only 40 hours. 40-hour work week, no possibility for extra time. This is the motion. And Gov gives the argument that says, and really explains it well, it says, workers are more efficient when they're not stressed, when they only work for these 40 hours, therefore it's good for companies to do this. And you want to explain to me that this argument is off-clash. How do you do this?
Perhaps say that
Sure, we want our workers to not be stressed, but it isn't a question about how many hours they put in work.
Oh, no, so that is a rebuttal, but it's a different sort of rebuttal. That already goes into the actual logic of the argument that we haven't really established in this point. But think of it this way. This motion is about the government forcing workers or companies to do this, right? If it is true that for every company and every worker, that would be the most efficient thing to do, companies would do it themselves, there is no need for this policy. So, and I would even say in the analysis, look, when I'm rebutting this, companies spend the great majority of their time thinking how they can be the most effective and make the most use of their workers. If what government is telling us was true, then first of all, you just don't need a mechanism to do this. All companies would just give their employees no more than 40 hours a week. But also, if this was true, we would just see this happening throughout the market. Obviously, this motion is only about the cases where this is not true. Like where companies have made the assessment that their workers are actually, that it's better for them to have workers working more than those 40 hours a week, right? And therefore, and this is not a long explanation, right? It doesn't take more than 15 seconds, 20 seconds of my time. But it has, at this point, quite invalidated the other team's argument. Now, obviously you can bring something back on clash. For example, if government were to say in their second speech something like, so how would you suggest rebuilding that speech after I got this rebuttal?
Well, it's not always about profit. Sometimes it's about stopping people from being exploited.
Oh, that's great, but that's a different argument again. The issue of exploitation is definitely a good argument for Gov here, but not this specific argument about productivity. Let's say I've already spent a lot of time as governments building the productivity argument and I want to make it still relevant after I got this rebuttal saying it's off clash. So maybe I could say something like, companies have a short-term bias, where they care about your productivity in the short term, but in the long term, employees actually become less efficient, and here are reasons why that's true. Or for example, saying, this is generally true, but companies still make bad decisions because some other reason, or maybe people work in more than one company at the same time, doing shifts in different places, so each company would like them to only work a specific amount of time, but it's not actually up to them. Anything of that sort can be a way of bringing that back on clash, but still the rebuttal of saying something is completely off clash is a very, very useful one to do. A slightly more advanced version of that. Let's say, so we have a debate, this was the final of BBU Open a few years back, and exactly this thing happened. The motion was, this house, you are a scientist, you have found a definitive proof that God does not exist. This proof is very compelling, like people are likely to believe it. You are the only person who knows this to be true. This house would not publish. Would destroy the evidence, would not publish it. Open Government, very, very good Serbian team, I guess you know them, Siri and Helena, Stefan Sirijansky and Helena Ivanov. They give very good analysis on why religion is the basis for, has been historically the basis for morality. Morality is developed from religious institutions and religious notions, and therefore it's really, really important for us to maintain religion. You want to claim that this argument is off clash. You probably, most of us will not be able to directly refute every line given by a very strong team like Helena and Stefan. But you want to, instead of tackling the argument, tackling the logic of the argument, just showing it's off clash. How do you do this?
It's irrelevant because religion already set the path for moral values to evolve further, so it's irrelevant whether or not we keep the religion.
Excellent. This is not a regrets debate. This is a debate, even if it's completely true that religion has done all these things have already happened. We have systems of morality that are currently independent of religion. It's not clear why people, as soon as they stop believing, we lose all those moral systems that they've evolved from it. And this is indeed the rebuttal that made them lose that debate to the team in closing opposition. So basically, so that if you're able to show that another team's argument is off clash, that's the most useful and the most effective form for rebuttal, because it can even take down really good, sophisticated analysis from really good teams if you just do that quite short analysis saying, here's why this is off clash, here's why this is irrelevant. And this will require, however, to actually make that analysis and explain very clearly why that is the case. And notice, a very important thing to note here, it's sometimes hard psychologically for judges to accept this. If a judge really likes an argument and the logic works, sometimes it will be hard for them to notice that you have actually done this and completely took down or rebutted an argument through just showing it's completely off clash. Be very, very explicit on why and very clear on why that thing is true. Even if it means adding another 10, 15 seconds to that rebuttal, just so you make sure they get it, exactly why that argument is off clash, because that's a slightly more sophisticated type of response that not everyone gets constantly. Okay, so this is one type of response. Second type of response, suggestions?
Attacking the logic?
Attacking the logic is great, but there's one even before that.
Not true.
Exactly, not proved. There was no explanation to an argument. Sometimes, unfortunately, this is the case. Someone throws an assertion, you could spend maybe 2 minutes attacking the logic behind that assertion. Sometimes that's even useful. Like, for example, if you know, there are teams, we all know this, they're really imbalanced in the sense of one speaker is significantly better than the other, and you have a LO standing up and giving a bunch of assertions, and then you have, and your DPM, and you know DLO is going to make the same arguments but actually build them. In that case, it might be useful to think, wait, what is the idea behind this argument? Can I rebut it? There's a famous story of this pair of Israeli debaters who were in a tournament in the Netherlands, and they're doing, one of them is doing PM, then LO stands up, says, my points are going to be this, this, and this, and sits down. Like literally giving the roadmap, and thank you, these were my points, thank you so much. So DPM stands up at this point with nothing written on the pages, because obviously he was planning to take that 7 minutes to actually do stuff. Stands up, 5 points of rebuttal, and rebuts each of those points as if it was an argument that was fully constructed. So that is something you can sometimes do. However, first of all, you could get it wrong. It might be completely different reasons than the one you think. Otherwise, it might be just very strange, like an assertion that you have no idea why that thing would be true. And sometimes also, there are these teams, these mean teams that we dislike, whose strategy is making lots and lots of unanalyzed arguments in one speech, and then building all those arguments in the second speech, or building some of those arguments, and often it's not possible to actually refute everything. So just going, look, this has not been explained, there was no logic behind this argument, we don't know why that's true, and even adding anything they add about this will be new material that we can't actually respond to. That's often useful. And therefore, we're just not going to address this any further. Or, for example, if you are a web speaker, and teams in front half have done this, when they had full assertions, at this point, they're bad. Like, they don't have a chance to build the logic into these assertions. So it's fair enough to just say, this was never proven, we don't know why this argument is true, we're not going to address it any further than that. And again, if this is the case, if actually something has not been proven at all, then that's much more useful, much more time efficient than trying to attack it and going in different ways, trying to tackle the logic, trying to tackle the fact, and so on. One thing to be careful of here, if there is some explanation to an argument, try and deal with a slight explanation that was given. Even if it's bad explanation, just explain why it's bad, but don't do this thing where you're going, this won't explain at all, but there is an explanation, and then it just goes like, no, that's not true. There is analysis here, I have it written down. So be slightly careful of that. Then, again, exactly as you said, attacking the logic. Attacking the logic is probably the most common type of rebuttal we actually do, which is just like, here's why. Usually it will be something of the format of, Milos just talked about, I guess, like analyzing and building step-by-step analysis. So attacking the logic would usually look like, here is the problem with the analysis. Like you have the premise, you have a link, conclusion. This link is wrong. Or these two links aren't actually connected. There is a jump, there is a leap between this link and this link. Usually this is what rebuttal to a logic of an argument would look like if that argument is well constructed. So, and we'll talk more about that later, but basically what I'll say here is you want to attack an argument where it's weakest. You do not want to, while it may seem contradictory to what I said before of you want to take the argument in the strongest version, but what I mean here is every argument will have points where it's better analyzed and other points where it's more strenuous, when you need to do some effort to believe, you need to do some like leap of faith in order to believe that part of the argument to be true. So that's where you want to attack. That's where you want yourself to be able to use your rebuttal in the most effective way. By the way, since I just gave an analysis workshop, which was the sort of opposite of that, plus you just had a workshop on analysis, I will just mention, if you are building an argument, think yourselves where you would attack that argument. Even ask your partner, where would you attack this argument? And make sure you have lots of analysis on that. Because basically there usually are specific places within an argument that are likely to be more contested than others. And you want to be aiming your rebuttal there, but you also want to be aiming more of your analysis to those parts. We'll give some examples of that later and practice it. Fourth type of rebuttal, factually incorrect. Less common in debate, but can sometimes happen. Let's say IR motions, the classic, the curse of many debaters. I personally love them, but many people dislike them quite strongly, specifically because of that. Because it can make a perfectly logical, well-constructed argument just is completely untrue in reality for quite obvious reasons. If I give a very extreme example of this, a tournament in Southeast Asia, a motion, this house believes that the US should withdraw all financial, like military support to Israel. Opposition going, if the US does this, then Israel will not be able to sustain its army and its neighbors such as Iraq and Libya will invade it. Iraq, now you're not from the Middle East, but neither Iraq nor Libya have a common border with Israel. Iraq has a border with Jordan that technically they could go through. Libya needs to pass like 4 different countries in order to get its tanks to relevant positions. So that would be just very factually incorrect, no matter how well analyzed. So sometimes just pointing out an argument is absurd in terms of the factual basis is also a very useful way of attacking or knocking down an argument. So that's just something to keep in mind. Although our game is mostly based on logic, sometimes facts do play in and are important to note. Fifth type of rebuttal, and this one is important and slightly less intuitive than the other ones. By this logic. What does by this logic mean? Try to think of an example. Okay, yeah, classic example is you have a motion about this house would ban alcohol. This house would ban the consumption of alcohol. And government says we need to ban alcohol because it is addictive. Responses. Your opposition. You're responding to this argument.
Could you repeat it one more time?
Yeah. This house would ban the sale of alcohol. Government makes the argument alcohol is addictive, therefore it should be banned. Yeah.
By this logic, we should ban sugar because.
Yeah, by this logic, we should ban sugar. What also should we ban by this logic?
I guess we're gonna have another motion on this. Voting abortion. This house would not board, but not ban abortions, no matter how old the child is then okay, then you don't need to.
Wait, I want to stick for a second with this example, with the example of this motion, and then we'll, if it's okay, I want to stick with the example of this motion, and then we'll talk about other examples. I'm great. It's great that there are questions. I just want to conclude the basic point before we move on.
It's like banning chocolate and coffee. Yeah.
Banning chocolate, banning coffee, potentially banning work, because there are people who are workaholics and become addicted to their work. Obviously, ban debating.
Basically, by that logic, we can ban everything because there are different types of people and everybody can have
exactly.
any weird addiction they want.
Exactly. So basically, it's just showing that the logic used by the other side leads to absurd conclusions if applied, if generally applied. This can be used in slightly more sophisticated ways. Like there are definitely many arguments that seem solid until you think, wait, what would that also mean? A classic example, which I really recommend watching, is the semi-final of Worlds 2012, where the motion is this House would ban any advertisement any form of advertisement that's supposed to be even slightly sexually enticing or sexually arousing. Opposition, leader of opposition, excellent debater, makes the claim that says there is currently a societal taboo around sexuality, around many forms of sexuality. It's really, really important for sexuality to be displayed, to be something that's in the common view, in order for people to be able to, for people to be able to engage with it, to have a conversation about it, and so on. Yeah.
By this logic, we need to have people using drugs in order to raise the problem of drugs.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure that actually follows from the logic, because I could see a difference. So the suggestion there was saying, by this logic, we should also legalize drugs in order to have a conversation about drugs. I would say, I think there is a distinction saying human sexuality is probably something that there are good reasons why, independently of sexualized commercials, we want to have conversations about. But anyway, this speaker then gets a POI asking, by this logic, do you also support people having sex on the street? He stops. He thinks. This is Ben Wolger, excellent debater, and he's known to be the only debater, or famed to be the only debater, who never stammered, never said or just super fluent. So this guy gets this POI, stands, thinks about it. 15 seconds he spends. Then eventually says, if it is proven to be inherently consistent with the logic of my case, then yes. They lost that debate. His partner, by the way, makes in DLO a claim specifically about LGBT and homosexuality and why we need a discussion on that sort of sexuality, and then gets a POI asking, so would you support showing gay porn in kindergartens? To which he also is unable to properly respond. At this point, this case is done. Although, again, great analysis, great speakers, but their logic doesn't make sense. If you take it to its logical conclusion, there is a big problem with the implications of that logic, and this is enough to take down the case. So, thinking about where the logic of the other side actually leads is a very, very useful way of tackling cases. This is especially true for principles. When we engage in more principle discussion of what should be our guiding principles of society. However, a few words of warning here. One, do not make this in a way that is an extreme variation of the other side's logic. For example, you obviously know this classic first year, this House would enact the death penalty, opposition going, if the government can just kill people, who will they kill next? If by your logic it is legitimate for the government to execute people, next day it will be executing political opposers or dissidents. No, this is not actually the logic built, therefore doing this is again just misrepping and a waste of time. So that's something to be mindful of. And you want to be very clear that what you're doing is not a slippery slope, but is actually applying the actual logic presented by the other side. So a very useful, so again, like explaining that something is off clash, it takes some elaboration. It takes, look, this is actually a criteria set, or this is actually the logic stated. Here is what the same logic leads to in a different situation. Here's why that means that logic is absurd. And then by that just showing that it's inconsistent. If you think about it, most of the responses to utilitarianism, why there's a problem, like a conceptual problem with the moral framework of utilitarianism, like the idea that that we should always try to maximize utility, to maximize happiness, most of them are this type of logic, like saying, so what if you have this one person who derives significantly more pleasure and more happiness than anyone else in society? Technically, that would mean you have to enslave the rest of society to do that person's bidding, right? Because you're maximizing the overall happiness. Or, for example, a completely healthy person comes to a hospital, his organs can be used to save 5 other people. Utility-wise, the right choice would be killing that person, giving his organs to those 5 other people. Obviously, that would be wrong. Like, there are big problems with it, and the logic actually leads to that conclusion. So that's a way of applying that statement. You had a question or an example, right?
Actually, I was mistaken. My analogy was not what I was thinking. So I realized that
okay, fair enough.
While I was speaking, that's why I was struggling.
No problem, no problem. And this is also very useful. Like, I'll just point out, thinking critically of your own thoughts and your own rebuttals is very useful, because sometimes it will stop you from making them in the actual debate and just saying something that's a waste of your time and even makes you sound less persuasive. So by this logic, very, very useful tool. Then we have, finally, and this is the least efficient sort of rebuttal, because it's not really a rebuttal, it's just true, but less important than something else. Because at the end of the day, and this comes into a different workshop that will probably happen at some point on weighing and prioritizing, at the end of the day, there are things that are just true. Like, there are claims by the other side that, like, if you enact the death penalty, there will be some people who will be deterred. There will be mistakes where people are wrongly executed. Both of these things will happen. Teams can mitigate them, they can have rebuttals, they can have really good reasons on why things will or will not happen. At the end of the day, these two things are true. And it's very, very important to acknowledge that at some point and go, yes, that is true, but what we are talking about is more important, but what we're talking about, it happens more, and so on. That's a slightly different workshop, but remember that this is also a valid and a useful type of rebuttal to have. Like, yes, this is true, but. This is basically the 6 types of rebuttal, the 6 answers to every argument ever made. One useful thing to note here, you can use many of those together. If an argument is very important from the other side, you can say both that this argument is logically invalid and the logic of it leads to absurd conclusions. Or you can even say this argument is off clash, but even if it's on clash, here is a problem with the logic of this argument, or here is a problem with the explanation of this argument. The more, generally I would say, the more important an argument of the other side is, the more weight you would try to give to rebutting that argument and making sure it doesn't stand. Just a second, there was something I wanted to add on that. I do not currently remember what it was. So, at this point, do you have any questions? Do you have anything you want me to discuss more in terms of rebuttal, how it's done? Please feel free. I mean, struggles you've had once that you had this specific problem with rebutting an argument. Okay, so what I suggest we do now is practice. And from practice, we might get more stuff and see more things that we need working on. How do we do this? Can we don't have another room, right? Where we can, because this is a big room. You know what, we can just, I think, stay for a while in this forum, and if we see that it's too much and not everyone gets a chance to speak, then we'll make it, we'll see how we can split it. So basically what I suggest we do is Lovro and I will just make arguments, and you will try together, there are many of you, to refute them and explain why those arguments are wrong. Would you like to start? Do you want me to start?
Just give me a motion.
Okay, motion, anyone? You know what, let's take the afterlife motion from yesterday.
Oh no.
No?
No.
Okay. Nobody likes that motion, oh well.
This house would ban Pope.
This has to ban Pope.
Well,
Huh?
perhaps the religious leaders.
Yeah, religious leaders is like
Would ban religious leaders?
Would
Okay.
ban.
Sounds hard, but fair. Now, you know what? Well, how about the first motion from yesterday, the education one?
This house prefers to give additional benefits to the welfare families that
Children succeed in school. Yeah. Okay, cool. So let's do, for example, we are opposition. We are now the opposition, and we are claiming that this leads to stress on stress on children, and therefore to those children performing less well. This is the argument we're trying to make.
they already have.
Wait. We haven't made the argument yet. That's just. If I just said that, the right response would be not explained. Because at this point they didn't give any logic. So yeah, let's make the argument.
All right. So I actually did this to them yesterday, so maybe.
Oh.
But let's start with the fact that probably we're talking about specific financial pressure here, right? So these kids are going to be under pressure to provide for their families, because at some point the fact whether they have good grades or bad grades is going to determine the amount of money that the family is going to be able to spend on family members and stuff like this. This is problematic because in the status quo, these people are already under a lot of financial stress and pressure because they are relatively poor to the rest of the society, which means they think about this a lot. So they think and they struggle with gaining money, with buying stuff other people have and stuff like this, Now, at this point, it's different because in the status quo, these people think from the perspective of our family cannot afford this. And now this pressure is different because the pressure is on them to change this by giving additional money if they perform well in schools and stuff like this. This is important because in schools, oftentimes you're reliant on specific high-pressured moments when you are on the bridge of getting a good grade or a bad grade. So think of things such as oral exams or things such as taking an exam. A lot of things happen at a specific moment where you have to focus a lot in order to perform well and stuff like this. Once this is combined with the idea of having pressure to perform well, these people are going to constantly, or these kids are going to constantly think about stuff that they have ahead of them, and they are going to feel stressed about this. They are going to not be able to study very well because they are going to be under pressure of having the burden of performing well, and what's going to happen if they don't perform well, and because of that, they're going to feel a lot of psychological stress, right? And this is something that oftentimes they're not going to be able to talk with other people because they're not going to be in the same relation as them. They're not going to be able to talk to their family about this because, again, they feel this pressure of performing well and stuff like this, which means that this pressure is likely not to be something that they are going to be able to talk with other people. They're going to accumulate this amongst themselves. It's going to build up, and at some point this is going to lead to problems for them, whether mentally or whether just a feeling of constantly being anxious and not being able to focus on stuff and like this.
Cool. Yeah.
Perhaps we can say, sure, we can claim that this is true, but since we are talking about kids that are coming from, welfare families, they already have this sort of pressure, and we need to sort of help them in relieving this sort of stress. This can provide this sort of mechanism in which they still, if they are managing to be good in school, no matter the stress, we are rewarding them in a way.
Okay, so I think this is a very good direction. the thing is, if you notice in Lovro's speech, he already addressed it, at least to an extent, because he said, look, we understand they are currently under stress. Here is the difference. The difference is, currently they just worry about their family not having money. Now they worry about they have to provide for their family. How do you respond to that? And I think this is a very good direction. So just take it one step further. Yeah?
On that point, I'd say that those families are getting additional money. So like they are actually on welfare, so they get money monthly. So that's just going to be in addition to whatever they get. So they don't have like the burden of providing everything for their family. That's
Okay, great. So that is a response that definitely mitigates the amount of additional stress that's happening. I agree with you completely. But anything else on that? So I'll just start by saying this was obviously a well-constructed argument. We cannot say, for example, this was not explained. It's also quite hard to say this is off clash, right? Because it's definitely an impact in the debate, it's an impact on children, it's an impact on their success. So where do we go? We probably go to try and detect the logic and explain why that, where there are problems in the logic. So we want to attack the delta. We want to say that the difference between the stress currently and the stress after this motion is not actually that large or even non-existent. How do we do this?
Because they're actually already stressed about performing well, and they can solve the money problem with performing well, so it's basically the same thing they have to do.
Why are they currently stressed with performing well?
Well, nobody wants to live on welfare. I mean, there are groups that just don't care about the school, and they won't perform well even with or without this model. But we are trying to help the ones that are currently trying to perform well.
Okay, I'll take some others. Yeah?
On yesterday's debate, we argued that these kids are already stressed because we find that these kids of these families are, even though they get are part of this welfare program, they are part of the labor, physical labor, and that's why they are part of a daily stress because they are the extra incomes of the family.
Great.
So that's why we believe that the stress that comes from school is more healthy than the stress that comes from labor.
Great. So basically saying, look, here's the problem. The assumption on government is that, or the assumption on opposition is that currently these kids are just on welfare and they don't have this need to provide. However, in many cases, they do. They go after school and they work another job at the same time, and sometimes they even quit school in order to work. This means they have the same amount of stress actually in both scenarios. Like they have the stress of providing in both under both worlds. Yeah.
I was going to ask, can we take this on another road and say that these kids, they are kids, and in this case they don't know what they're actually doing, and they don't know what the importance of this money to their family because of their age. And it's not causing them stress because they don't actually know the importance of it.
Great. So that's basically attacking that's again attacking the logic, just in a different part of the chain of the logic. Going, look, again, there is an assumption, and notice we always go by. Here is an assumption that's not proven. Actually, that's maybe the rule we can take from this. The rebuttal goes by. There's a jump, right? There's a jump from this part of the link to this part of the link, and here specifically saying, look, the assumption on opposition is that these kids know that there is a direct correlation between their performance in a test and the amount and their family getting more money. Now, this could work depending on your case as gov. If your case as government is saying we want to motivate children, that case can't work, right? Because then you have to assume that children know that their performance in a test matters to their family. If, however, your case is we want to motivate parents, this can definitely work. Then if what you want to do is get the parents' incentives to change, then you can say, look, the child doesn't know what check his parents get from the government per month. That is not something, he doesn't see that, it doesn't mean anything to him, he doesn't know probably what a bank account is, definitely not how to operate and access it. The ones who know are the parents, the parents have a clear incentive for the child to not be stressed, right? They don't want that child to underperform and all these things. So the likely scenario is just what the child experiences is parents sitting with him more often and doing the homework with him and saying, yes, you can do this, and so on. So the knowledge of this is really, really important doesn't even get to the child. Great. So these are two ways of refuting the argument that I think each of them can be quite strong. Both of them taken together mean a lot of work for the other team to try and rebuild the argument again.
I would also like add another perspective.
Sure.
I would start my rebuttal by saying that it seems that his argument is like the main premise and the frame of his argument was that we should take this kind of psychological pressure as an imperative criteria to judge the quality of this public policy. But I would say that it's not really clear why that criteria is relevant to the discussion. Because, for example, as a counter argument, we would say that in this civilized modern age area, being able to handle pressure and to regulate your pattern of behavior towards handling that pressure makes you more productive and is a necessary skill that kids should be exposed and should be like incentivized to deal with. And that's why even if the criteria, in fact, this tackles why perhaps it's not really relevant or not as important.
So I think this is a very interesting way of approaching it. The main issue I would say is the claiming is saying not just there is stress, but this stress actually leads to worse performance. What you need to do in order for that rebuttal to work is say why it is more likely that the stress leads to good performance. Like, so it's again tackling a different part of the chain of reasoning, saying, look, the part we have a problem with is the assumption that I am stressed means I do less well. Actually, when I'm stressed, I am more focused. When I'm stressed, I study harder. When I'm stressed, I develop better studying methods. All these things mean that I do this better. The one thing additionally that I think is necessary here is, again, there is rebuttal in Lovro's analysis that's directly on this, right? There is the analysis that says there are specific points in time where I really, really need to be focused. When I'm stressed, I'm really worried that this, am I presenting this correctly? When I'm stressed, I'm really worried, and so on. And if you want to make that argument, I would also say you need to address that directly, like explain why that is untrue. And the alternative characterization that you have is more likely. Because what we don't want to do, and this actually brings me to a very important bottom line that I haven't discussed before, what we don't want to do in rebuttal is just build a competing analysis, which is not explaining why the other side is wrong, but just saying this could also work in a different way. Like there's also a different scenario where this could work. And then what you're doing is you're leaving it up to the judge to say, which do I find more plausible? And that could work for you. It could also not work for you. And it very much depends. You're leaving it up to chance in a sense. And what's much more useful there is directly engaging with the analysis made by that team. Or they say stress is bad for your performance because X. Here's why X is untrue. But we think it's actually the opposite is true, and taking that further. I think that's definitely very, very useful. Cool. Let's take another example, another analysis. This time I'll do one which is motion from the Euros 2009 semi-final. This house believes that the desecration of religious sites is a legitimate tactic in war. Desecration of religious sites, like, you go to a temple or a church and you defile it, as stated by Prime Minister to set up the debate, we piss in the ponds, we dance in the streets with the corpses of saints. So that's a thing that is a legitimate tactic in warfare. Opposition makes the following claim. it is, so there are things that are illegitimate to do in war. For example, it is illegitimate to deny people basic things like food or water. Religion is as important, or sometimes more important to people, than food and water. Therefore, taking away their ability to practice their religion is actually as bad and should be banned for the same reasons as, for example, denying people food and water in war. How do we respond to this argument? We are government.
Not sure. I think that this is attacking the logic because you would display why those two elements are not congruent by giving a biological explanation and telling that in order to have a sustainable way of living. Not sure if that's
sure.
These are like biological needs. You need to eat. You need to have food and etc. And religion is like doesn't fit in that category, and by that criteria, the analogy doesn't fit.
Right? Yeah.
Can you say sure, but essentially religion is not necessarily tied to temples or stuff like that?
Not tied to?
Like religious sites.
Okay, cool. So yeah, sure.
I would go with war is a state of hell, and we're not discussing whether it's morally wrong or morally correct. We're discussing whether it's an efficient or tactic to decrease the morale of the people.
Could be, except the motion is phrased as this house believes it is a legitimate tactic of war. So that would be specifically less relevant, given that that is the question asked by the motion. But yeah.
Could we maybe use by this logic and then say that perhaps a musician has the same amount of, let's say, commitment to his instrument and music as that one person has to religion.
Cool.
So we can then use by this logic, then we can actually take anything in consideration where it could go the line.
Great. So I'll take the three things that were said and try to see how they work, like as different layers of rebuttal maybe. So one, saying this is factually incorrect that taking away desecrating a religious site means that you are taking away a person's freedom of religion. Because, for example, you can practice your religion by rebuilding that site, and that would be just as meaningful a religious act as worshiping there, for example.
Yeah, sure. Can we take, like, for example, that isn't necessarily the truth, because like if there were wars in the history, we have example where people gather together to pray and catacombs and stuff.
Yeah, definitely giving examples is useful as an addition to that, to that rebuttal, like saying, look, for example, I would say the Jewish people have had their temple destroyed maybe 2,000 years ago. People still practice Judaism. Apparently, like, you can move past it. So that's one way of tackling it. Another way of tackling it, which is a sort of combination of both the things you said, is going, look, there is a difference between someone really caring about something or really wanting a right and something being a right. Because if we go by this logic and say, if I care about something more than I care about food and water, then that thing should be provided to me. Then if, I really care about having $1 million, I really want $1 million. I want it more than I want money, or than I want food or water. Then do I have a right to that? If, for example, I'm really in love with someone, and the love that I feel for this person is more important to me than food or water, I'm willing to fast for days in order to be with this person I love. Does that mean I have a right to be with this person? Even if this person doesn't want it necessarily, and so on. Like, there are a lot of problems if you take this logic, or the example of the musician. Obviously, anything can be a very, very important desire for people. And what should be the criteria? Like, this is the first step, sharing this logic is wrong. The logic we should actually be applying is an objective notion of rights, which is what you propose, saying, look, actually, there are things that just should be rights. It doesn't matter what you think you deserve. what matters is what objectively should be had, which is, for example, the basic ability to live and maintain your life, food, water, and so on, biological needs, but not necessarily other needs. So maybe
I
combine
would
it.
like to hear a model of argumentation regarding motions that are sometimes called like Harry Potter motions, for example. No, I mean not Harry Potter.
Yeah,
motions.
sure.
Robin Hood motions. I'm not sure why I recall.
Oh, okay.
For example, this house would support a full Marxist revolution.
Okay.
Okay.
So,
Can I jump in? Before?
yeah, of course.
Yeah, so on what Ayal was saying most recently. So I think that sometimes it's easy to say that something is more objective than something else. I think in this specific regard, you can use the criteria of how we can assess what people actually need. And then say that it's very unlikely we're able to objectively assess how much people need religion. Specifically, we talk about people who are of like different state of religion in terms of how committed they are, blah, blah, blah. While comparatively, we can objectively assess that all of the people need bread and water. And also something that's very often used in debates in rebuttal especially is, but also what Ayal said in terms of weighing, is the idea of what comes as a prerequisite for something else. So if you have religion as a satisfied need, then you might or might not have food and stuff like this. But if you don't have food and water as a satisfied need, that means you definitely cannot have religion because you're not going to be able to sustain your living, right? So this is something how you can mechanize the objectiveness and thus rebut this.
Yeah, very true. Yeah.
Can we just say, even if we say that the religion does matter to you, isn't it true that in the state of war you would prioritize food and water rather than something?
I think that is weaker because you, like, I don't know why that's true. I don't know if this thing is true, and not much for assessing it. But definitely, I think these are all good rebuttals. You asked about the motions like global Marxist revolution. This is less the issue of this workshop because we're talking about rebuttal and not necessarily about argumentation. But this did give me an idea. Let's take Bo and Fanella's case from the Thessaloniki World Final and rebut it. I might be slightly misrepresenting it. I don't think I am very much so. The basic premises of that case, and help me if I'm missing stuff, is basically the following things. One, property. They're trying to justify a global Marxist revolution, saying the following things. One, most capital in the world was acquired unjustly. It was acquired unjustly because, people stole from others, people had systems of oppression, some people had more benefits, and so on. That's one. Two, many people live in a situation where they have literally very little choice about their lives. Because they don't have money, they live under what Bo beautifully calls the dictatorship of no alternatives, of the notion of you have to live your entire life just struggling to get food, just struggling to sustain yourself, work the only job that's offered you. You don't actually have a lot of control over your life. Thirdly, the idea that because capital was unjustly acquired, that is, these two things taken together, the fact that things were stolen from people, and that most property was stolen from people, and this leads to people being in a degraded state, this is an affront to humanity in general, and something we should correct. Plus the idea that says a Marxist revolution is something that it might take a lot of price and a heavy toll from people, but basically it falls under the principle of self-defense. Because people's lives and freedoms are being threatened, and this is something that, and because of this, this falls under the idea that I can defend myself, and when I'm defending myself, it is legitimate for me to do, even act violently, and it is legitimate for me to do things such as, and plus, it might not work. We accept that it might not work. However, the principle is what we have to justify is this is legitimate, and we justify it through the idea of self-defense. This is the case rebuttals. Yes.
Sure, I would just go, I cannot attack the whole thing because it's a boss case after all, but on the whole idea that sure the system was unjust, can you say, going by this logic, many things throughout history have been proven to be unjust? Should we start burning churches because essentially they shown women to be witches and stuff like that? If you go by this logic,